I am very excited to introduce our speaker this evening, Murray Burgess. Murray is an urban ecologist, ornithologist, and children's author. She is currently pursuing her PhD in wildlife and conservation biology at North Carolina State University, where her research is on the impacts of sensory pollutants on songbirds, and we'll hear about some of that work this evening. Murray is also an avid birder and an advocate for justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. In 2022, she co-founded Field Inclusive, which is a nonprofit that amplifies and supports marginalized and historically excluded field biologists. So, Murray, I'm really looking forward to hearing more about any of the very important work you're doing. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, thank you so much for inviting me, and thank you for taking the time to listen to me and come to my talk. So today, I just wanted to start with a little bit about me before we dive into the topic of light pollution, avian health, and cute barn swallow chicks. I promise, cute barn swallow chicks. And so just about me, I was always interested in birds from a young age. I wanted to work with birds in some capacity or any kind of animal, really. And so I did my undergrad degree at Mississippi State University. My first research experience was with camera traps and coyotes, and that really kind of cemented that, like, oh, I really love researching. I love asking questions and doing research. And after I took a birding class at Mississippi State, I said, yes, this is absolutely the area I want to focus on. And that led me to pursue my PhD at North Carolina State University, focusing on birds, sensory pollutants, and avian ecology. In addition to my research, I also do some science communication and environmental education for kids of all ages. I enjoy doing SciComm talks and presentations like this. I also work with like anywhere from third graders all the way to undergraduate students. And I just do a lot of activity-based learning, like bird banding activities, both real and like mock bird banding for the little kids. And just with the goal of getting the little kids to do as much as possible and get their hands-on experience as a scientist. I also have some children's books out and upcoming. The first one I self-published is called Why Wolves Howl, available on Amazon. Just a fictional story about why wolves howl at the moon and how a wolf became friends with the moon. But I'm super excited for my next couple of books coming out. The first one coming out either this fall or winter. And it is the first in a series about a little Black girl named Sparrow who lives in a suburban town and explores the nature around her. And the first book, Sparrow Loves Birds, will teach the audience how to identify birds by sight, sound, and movement. And then the second book about Sparrow Loves Reptiles will also be about identifying common backyard reptiles and like other things like venomous and non-venomous snakes. And just exploring other organisms that can be found in like urban or suburban environments. So stay tuned for that. And then I felt like I didn't have enough on my plate as it was. So I decided to co-found a nonprofit for marginalized and historically excluded field researchers. So marginalized field researchers, such as like people of different races or gender expressions or religions, disability accommodations, they all need extra support, extra resources, extra attention to be able to successfully do their jobs. And so Field Inclusive hopes to kind of bridge some of those gaps and provide people with the resources and education, awareness, and financial support that they may need to help bridge those gaps. So I'd be happy to talk more about this towards the end, but I just wanted to encourage everyone to follow Field Inclusive. I listed all of our websites and social media tags at the bottom, and please check us out and help us spread the word about these issues. Okay, so now I would like to talk a little bit about light pollution, how the health consequences of light pollution affects like humans and wildlife, I'll talk specifically about some of the research I've been doing on barn swallows, and of course, end with some action steps. And I'll, of course, try to save plenty of time at the end for questions. So what is light pollution? It's also called artificial light at night, and it comes from any incandescent or LED bulbs. The biggest source is street lights. Also, if you know downtown buildings that keep their lights on all night, or like the big billboards that are up, this is all considered light pollution. Light pollution also contributes to like carbon emissions and temperature risings because of the energy source. And overall, light pollution continues to increase 6 to 10% each year, just because urban development in general continues to increase really fast. There are a couple of different types of light pollution that I focus on, one of which is called over illumination. Now, this might be when the light is like way too intense, like more intense than it needs to be. For example, in my apartment complex, they keep putting in these new lights that when I turn my lights off inside, the outside still looks like there's sunlight coming through, even though it's night. Sky glow is the light that is reflected upward that kind of creates a haze in the sky. And that haze is like what obscures the stars on a daily basis and like prevents people from like seeing the sky clearly. Whereas light trespass can also happen on like local scales, like buildings that are lit can highlight other buildings that are not lit. Or also it can happen on a larger scale where light from urban areas escapes into neighboring or rural natural areas. So all of these kind of types of light pollution are a little bit of a problem to look at. I also get the question, since there are different types of lights, are certain lights of light pollution more harmful than others? And the answer is kind of yes and no. So the blue light that you find on most electronics is the most harmful type of light pollution. This could also be called cool white light, which is like a really intense, really bright, either white or blue colored light. Longer wavelengths of light, which is like the red colors, the yellow colors, oranges, are a little bit better than blue and white lights. However, in all studies done on like wildlife as well as humans, any type of artificial light source has some kind of effect on the organism. And a lot of the observed effects of light pollution are affecting what's called circadian rhythm. So have you ever felt like you know when it's your bedtime, or maybe you've woken up before your alarm clock went off? That is your natural circadian rhythm telling you what is time for your body to do. It's your own internal clock. And this internal clock is driven by natural light cycles, like the sun rising and setting, which stars are in the sky. The amount of light coming into your eyes drives your internal clock. But if you have light pollution, the light pollution is more of a more constant light source that throws off those natural cycles. But you might be thinking, well, I've got an alarm clock, so what does it matter that artificial light impacts my circadian rhythm? Well, it does matter, because there are some consequences of light pollution that have already been measured in humans, such as getting restless sleep, increasing your stress and anxiety. It could even cause retina damage for a sustained period of time, mostly staring at screens, which I'm sure a lot of us do all day long. And unfortunately, light pollution has found to increase the risk for cancer and other serious health issues. So hang on to this slide, keep this in mind, and now look at this kind of map of the United States, North America. About 80% of North Americans cannot see the Milky Way. And in this map of light pollution, the red and yellow spots are where the most light pollution is, whereas the kind of blue and gray spots are where the least are. So if we look at this map and how many North Americans can't see the Milky Way, well, how many wildlife species can't see the Milky Way? compare this light pollution map to like the hot spots of endemic species in the United States, again, with the red areas being the highest concentrated ones. You can see that the amount of light pollution and the amount of species kind of coincide at the same spot at the same large cities, which kind of raises the question of like, wow, if light pollution is having all of this impact on us, then what is it doing to the wildlife? And what it's doing is the exact same thing. A lot of the research is showing that animals are thrown off of their natural rhythms, getting poor sleep, they're more stressed out, having this fight or flight response, and unsure a whole lot about like retina damage or like the other serious health issues. But that's where a lot of the research is starting to come in and where my research begins to come in. So my overall question is, how does sensory pollutants impact birds? So I want to see if birds experience the same kind of impacts that we do from sensory pollutants. And light pollution overall is what we call a sensory pollutant. Noise pollution can also be considered one, but a sensory pollutant is anything that impacts an organism's ability to either detect natural cues or the pollutant kind of misguides them to follow the wrong cue. So let's talk about some more concrete examples with this in birds. A lot is actually already studied about how adult wild birds respond to light pollution. And these are some of the effects. One of the biggest ones is changes in migration or having disoriented navigation. And a lot of what happens because of this disorientation is grounding, which you kind of see in this top left photo. Grounding is when the bird is on the ground, usually confused or tired, exhausted of trying to fly around and navigate. And this, of course, puts the bird in a very vulnerable state, usually preyed on by cats at this state. Another situation that happens is building collisions, which are often very fatal. There are about 1 billion building collisions every year. And so that's really a huge problem to kind of address to help save these like migrating birds every year. Another impact that people are beginning to discover is that light pollution causes birds to mate a little bit earlier or start building nests a little bit earlier. They develop their reproductive organs a little bit earlier in some cases. And so that is evidence that light pollution isn't just like this outward thing, you know, affecting migration. It's also an inward thing affecting internal mechanisms. And so that's kind of what I aim to find out. But in chicks, a lot is known about adult birds, but not a lot is known about wild baby birds. And there have been some studies done that are more related to like poultry and egg production, but not any studies done on like wild songbirds. So this is the start of my research. And these are kind of the hypotheses that I have about like how light pollution might be impacting chicks. I'm thinking that like everyone else, they are not getting a good night's sleep, and that leads to a stress response. And that stress response will impact their metabolic health and physical development. Now, don't worry, I'm going to break down how exactly that might happen. So this is a flow chart for like what happens in natural conditions. So the chick gets fed throughout the day, which raises its blood sugar levels. It has a lot of energy. And then nighttime comes, the chick falls asleep under natural darkness. It has no disturbances, no stress. And while the chick is asleep, the glucose that they gather throughout the day powers their body to like build up their body, build their muscles, help them grow feathers. And then, of course, if that glucose is being used within the body, then like the blood sugar levels are regulated, everything's normal, and the cycle begins again the next day. However, let's throw light pollution into the mix. We see that the chick gets fed and that the blood sugar levels rise once again, But if the chick can't sleep due to light pollution, what happens to that extra blood sugar? Is the body getting enough power for nutrients and building muscles and building feathers? And are the blood glucose levels still regulated? They could be unregulated due to stress giving them a fight or flight response, which also requires a lot of energy and like raises the blood sugar even more. And just like in humans, a raised blood sugar level in birds could be indicative of diabetes. So yes, birds could get diabetes because of light pollution. And so this is how I kind of like test out this whole thing. So I do a light pollution experiments I have for the past 3 years. And this happens in Snow Camp, North Carolina. It is a rural area about an hour away from Raleigh. And I go into this like big rural area, even though this is like an urban problem, because I want to like isolate the source of light pollution so that the only artificial lights that are around are like the ones that I put up. And so I'm testing these hypotheses about light pollution impacting chick growth and development, as well as chicks experiencing a stress response that is regulated by glucose. So this is my setup. The barn that I work in has about 50 nests in it, with about like 20 to 35 of those nests being active each breeding season. And so what I do is I go through the nests, I like label them nest 1, nest 2, nest 3, and then I just like randomly assign half of the nests to be like kind of left in natural conditions. The lights are strung up over all of the nests, but like some of them are off while some of them are on all night long. And so I divide up the barn into those 2 treatments. I go in and I check them at night sometimes, make sure everything's working properly and seeing what the nighttime activity is like. And during the day, I take a ton of samples. So I do nest monitoring, first of all, which is just checking to see how many eggs the nest has in it, when the eggs hatch, kind of what the parents are doing. Are they building up the nests? Are they spending a lot of time incubating? Just kind of getting those preliminary things. And then once the chicks hatch, I move on to all these different measurements. I measure their body, like their head. I take their weight, see how long their wings are, how long their legs are, and if they're gathering any fat in their bodies. I measure feather growth. I take blood samples. I also take like standardized photos so I can like visually track their growth as they age. And finally, once the chicks get big enough, I band them as well. This is just a photo so you can see how tiny they are. Some people think they look like little weird alien bugs, but I think they're super cute. These are all newborn barn swallow chicks. They start off about the size of a grape. They weigh like 1 single gram, which is like the weight of a paper clip or a thumbtack. And I also have a secret talent to share with all of you. I am also a bird nail technician. I don't know if you can see it in this like kind of bottom right picture, but the nails are green. And I paint the nails with nail polish so I can like track each individual chick as they grow and know which one is which. And that's one of my favorite things to do. And then with some of the blood samples, I collect instant blood samples in the field about every other day as the chicks grow. And that time happens just like how a person would check their blood sugar levels. Just a little prick in their wing, and I take 1 little drop of blood, and I have a glucometer that gives off an instant reading. But as the chicks are about to fledge, I also take a one-time pooled blood sample from all the chicks in the nest, and I freeze them and hope to send them off for like some more in-depth laboratory tests to like look at their protein and blood DNA content and all those other things. I also really love these pictures because they look super grumpy after getting their blood drawn, which is understandable because I hate it too when it happens to me. I emphasize here that the mother is still taking care of the chicks. I'm not raising them. All I do is like take them out of the nest in the morning, take all of my measurements as quickly as possible, and then return them back to the nest. It's like I run a doctor's office for birds. And yes, this is my dog. He is a terrible field technician, but I love him anyway. The only thing that I do mess with in my study system is the predators. I have to save my sample size. This is a rat snake that comes like all the time trying to eat my chicks. I've done relocations of snakes and tried to put up like snake preventatives around the barn. I do keep a record of any predation events that do happen and will most likely do an analysis to see if like a certain treatment is predated more. Like maybe that's another side effect of light pollution that could be impacting the stress levels and other things in my study. Here is an example of another unnatural side effect. This is one very extreme example of wing asymmetry. And this has mostly only been recorded in laboratory settings before, which is like a laboratory is indoors under artificial light. And why we think this happens is that it's due to the mother's behavior while the egg is incubating. It's usually because she didn't like roll the egg around enough so that it was like incubated evenly on all sides. So in my study, I wasn't directly monitoring parental behavior. It was just too much to do for one study, but I would love for future studies to monitor the parents alongside the chicks to look for confounding effects like this. So the results that I have so far, in the natural conditions, we find that the barn swallow chicks have a normal blood glucose level, but they end up with a heavier body mass than their light pollution counterparts, and they also grow their feathers a little bit slower, which means that they fledge a little bit later on. But if you look at the light pollution treatment, they have a higher average blood glucose level with a lower body mass than in natural conditions, and they fledge faster. They leave the nest faster and their feathers are like developed more. So why might this be happening? We think that there is some type of trade-off between the body growth and the feather growth. And the chicks in the light pollution might be prioritizing their feather growth so that they can fly away from the stressful light source faster. And this is just anecdotal evidence, but I have seen like the light pollution chicks that do fledge and leave the nest. Sometimes like they return to the nest when they're really young, but they won't return to their original nest. They'll hang out in like an adjacent nest that isn't lit and like chill out in theirs. Like they really don't want to go back to the stressful nest that they grew up in. So this has been like a really interesting effect. What does it mean? Well, some of the implications is that, like I said, it is possible for birds to have metabolic diseases caused by increased blood sugar levels. So we're unsure if this is severe enough to result in a metabolic disease. It doesn't look like it from the data that I have, but it is possible. And like I said, there is a trade-off between feather growth and body growth that is caused by light pollution. And so kind of some follow-up research to do to further answer some questions is about body maintenance. Like, do the light pollution fledglings ever catch up? Do they build up their muscles more afterwards? Maybe their food or feeding rate might play a factor. Another question is if the birds are leaving the nest faster, does that give the parents more time to lay more eggs and raise more chicks? Barn swallows usually try for like 2 broods a season, sometimes 3. So maybe they could have more if their chicks are leaving the nest faster. Also, of course, we want to know if there is a difference in survival rates between chicks that grew up in light pollution versus natural conditions. That's one of the reasons why I banded the chicks, because hopefully in the future, there can be like a recapture study and see how many adults come back to the same area and how many of those adults like have long-term effects from light pollution or not. And of course, the overall question, does light pollution induce only a phenotypic shift or an evolutionary shift? Are barn swallow nestlings just expressing phenotypic plasticity, like it doesn't really change their genetic makeup, it's just flexible feather growth, flexible body mass? Or are they actually making like genetic adaptations in response to light pollution? So interesting questions that I hope to do further studies on. I'm planning on finishing my current research and PhD program, hopefully by this summer, my fingers are crossed, but I would love to like continue to do urban ecology research and light pollution research like this with birds. But I've talked about all of that. What about the light pollution? Like, what can we do? So let's go through like some potential solutions. This is the summary solution. Either turn off the lights, establish protected dark zones, or change the lights. So let's break each one of these down. So first solution is turn off the lights. I love this article title. It's both kind of sad and hilarious. During a 1994 blackout, LA residents called 911 when they saw the Milky Way for the first time. The sky glow, that haze of light that obstructs the stars, is so prevalent that people go their entire lives without ever seeing the Milky Way or ever knowing like all of the stars and constellations and seeing that. So turning off the lights could be like just a simple small scale solution that everybody is capable of doing. Is benefits for wildlife and benefits for humans to live under natural light and dark cycles and experience their own natural circadian rhythm. And of course, other benefits for humans is better sleep and lower electric bills, which I think sounds fantastic to anybody. So let's turn them off. And the second step is establishing protected dark zones. And this is basically just turning off the lights on a larger scale, having like some policies or like mandated areas where the lights have to be off. This larger area of protected land can act as like a light pollution sanctuary, and it will help reduce that overall sky glow that is so prevalent. Benefits for humans, there is like, you can establish like a park for stargazing, of course, working to reduce the sky glow. And another thing is that dark sky programs lessen the strain on the local electric grid. If you remember back in December, I'm not sure if it was happening in San Francisco or not, but I was in Mississippi and Tennessee and in North Carolina. There was very severe weather and there were scheduled rolling blackouts because of the strain on the electric grid during snowstorms. And so if we had something like this where the lights are being conserved and energy is being conserved, we would have not needed to do those rolling blackouts or have such a strain on the electric grid during these emergency situations. So that's like a huge benefit for the infrastructure of urban areas. And then finally, we know that it's like unfeasible to like turn off all of the lights, but with the lights that do remain on, we can at least change the type of lights that they are. So like I said before, red and yellow colored lights are less harmful than white and blue lights. They have the least amount of effect on our circadian rhythms. Also, LED lights are great for reducing heat and carbon emissions. And it is best to have any lights enclosed and facing downward so that only the area that you need illuminated is lit up instead of like the whole surrounding area. And another great option is also motion sensor lights. So you have light when you need it and it's off when you don't need it. If you're interested in like some more educational materials on how light pollution affects like wildlife, electricity, crime, and like a bunch of other topics, I highly recommend checking out the International Dark Sky Association. They have a lot of ways to like advocate for building like a dark sky park, the second step that I took away. They also have resources on where to find like sustainable lighting products for your own home or organizations. So check them out. It's a great resource for a lot of stuff. And finally, if you don't remember anything else from like tonight's presentation, here are the 3 main points that I most want you to remember. 1, light pollution comes from all artificial light sources. 2, reducing light pollution is better for human health and wildlife health. Everybody benefits. And finally, light pollution is a conservation issue for wild birds that is still kind of being newly explored, especially with the impacts of chicks in health and development. So here's the takeaway: screenshot it, take a picture, remember this big message at the end. And then here is my contact information as well. I would be happy to answer any questions that you have, both now, or you can like message me on social media or email. Anything is fine. And thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Marie. That was so wonderful to hear more about you, first of all, and also about your work with light pollution and imagining you painting little tiny chick nails. And also really appreciate you sharing things that people can do both on a personal level and even on like a broader advocacy level too. So all really important info.
Thank you.
Yeah. And we have several questions in the chat, so we'll go ahead and jump right into those. So our first question is from Chris. Are there any similar studies being done on other species?
Yeah, so I think there are a lot of similar studies. I know most of like the forefront of the research is happening in like European countries like England and like Germany on European blackbirds, great tits or other European tit species. And I think tree swallows might also be a big species. But yes, there are a lot of other studies being done, mostly on adults though. I still haven't seen a whole lot being done on nestlings.
Yeah, so you're really at the forefront of exploring that part of it. Very cool. And then from Orr, do you have any plans to explore the differential effects of different kinds of light pollution?
Yeah, not in my current study system, but yes, I would like to take a look at that in my future studies.
Yeah, and would that be in relation to those different kinds of light pollution that you talked about in the beginning, like sky glow versus trespass?
Yeah, different, and as well as different like wavelengths and spectrums of light and quantifying those effects on health and development.
All right, well, hopefully we'll learn more about those in the future. And then all the way from Taiwan, how will light pollution affect adult birds during the breeding season?
Yeah, so 2 major effects, I think. One is what I mentioned earlier about them wanting to like mate and nest a little bit earlier. There's one study on European blackbirds that showed that they developed their reproductive organs earlier under light pollution. And then the second thing is the stress affects like all the birds, unfortunately. So what are the parents experiencing? Are they getting enough sleep? Are they waking up earlier and like feeding their chicks earlier? Just like what are the parental behaviors that could also be affecting like the chicks? So yeah, there's a lot to look at there.
Yeah, both with adults and chicks. And then Mark asked if you're going to publish your barn swallow study.
I'm gonna try my best. That's the intention. Yeah, I have my first chapter of my dissertation is almost done and like ready to be sent out. So hopefully there'll be at least one chapter coming out soon and more later.
Nice. Good luck. It's a process, I know.
Thank you. I'll need it.
And then Jan asked, in your experiments, are the light levels typical or representative of urban lights, or are they more extreme?
So they're representative of a typical urban setting. It would most closely mimic a street light. So like birds that nest under like street lights or like around residential areas. if you know lux, like streetlights are typically at level 5 lux. And that is about like the direct impact that I have in my study system as well. Same light intensity.
Yeah, I'm sure people have lots of experiences seeing birds nesting in areas that have a lot of light pollution, just like in your study area.
Yeah.
And then Candace asked, how does light pollution affect insect populations?
Oh, that's a good question. And at least in my study system, the way that it impacts the insects is that the insects seem like drawn to the light. And so that makes them like more easily predated by the barn swallows. On some of my night visits, I've seen some of the parents like up and active at night and like swooping around catching bugs. And so I feel like it's probably detrimental to the insect populations. I'm not entirely certain like what other studies have shown, but it's definitely a huge factor about insects like food resources for the birds as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's probably lots of research that we could look into that is already existing about how insects are affected by light pollution. Oh, and then Lois shared that apparently insects don't see yellow light very well, so that can help with the insect apocalypse if they don't get attracted to it and killed by them. And they've also heard that artificial light can also affect plants and throw them off, especially at certain wavelengths. So lots of far-reaching effects for light
Oh
pollution.
yeah, the whole trophic cascade of effects.
Mhm. And then Andy has a couple of questions here. The first is, how much light were you exposing the birds to and for how long? Was it blue-rich light, and were you trying to duplicate a particular scenario that barn swallows are regularly exposed to?
Yeah, so the birds were exposed to 12 hours of light at night. I think I had it from like 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. And the color of light that I use is usually called warm whites. So I use warm white lights. They have a little bit of like a yellowy tinge to them, but they're mostly on a white spectrum. And like I said before, the intensity is similar to what a street light would be. Um, the barn worked out really well. There's a roof over the barn, so like the moonlight is like more blocked out. And so you have like only the like natural darkness for some of the nests that are dark, and then like this small illuminating light over the nests that are in the treatment.
Okay, yeah. And then the second part of the question is, are you leaning one way or another in terms of whether these changes affect the bird's genetics or not?
From the data that I have right now, I am leaning towards no, they are not being affected genetically, because the differences that we do see are like really, really small. So not like this huge like gap in like severe, like one is fledging way faster than the other. So that leads me to believe that it's more of like a phenotypic plasticity, flexible thing instead of a genetic thing. But definitely will need a whole lot more data, especially from my systems, because that rat snake that I showed was very devastating to my sample size. So I'm working with a small sample of just this one barn. And so more research is needed, but I'm leaning towards not.
Okay, interesting. And since you mentioned your snake, there is a question from Ronald. Could lights help predators find their prey?
It could, depending on how the predators find their prey. I know that like mammals like raccoons and like possums are beneficial to like the light is beneficial for them to help predate chicks from nests. Thankfully, I managed to kind of like predator proof the barn as best as I could. It was just that one rat snake, man. But yeah, I noted what nests were predated, so I still need to do the analysis to see if it was more treatment nests or not, but it could definitely help predators out.
Yeah, well, that's actually pretty impressive that you just had the one predator problem during
One
your study.
snake.
Yeah. Okay, and then a question from Jesse just came in. Isn't a bird chirping all night considered sound pollution? So should the owner of the light source correct this type of lighting to prevent this?
So I wouldn't say it's considered sound pollution because sound pollution is typically artificial. So think like traffic and like music from people talking and everything. But birds chirping at night is definitely like a nuisance that many people are aware of and like find problematic. So turning off your like porch lights or house lights at nights, trying to like using blackout curtains so that the light from inside doesn't escape out can usually help residential areas like reduce the amount of like birds chirping in their ear at 2 a.m. So yeah, if you're having that problem, like try some of those solutions and hopefully it helps out.
Nice. Yeah, and that's kind of a double solution, right? You're reducing light pollution and what some people might consider to be noise that they are find
Mhm.
unwelcome. Very nice.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And then David asked, how did you keep the light from reaching the dark nests?
That's a good question. So first I was like kind of lucky with how the nests were spaced out so that I didn't have to have like a dark nest directly next to a light nest. But also what I did with the nests that weren't supposed to be lit, I covered the little bulbs with like tin foil, and the ones that were lit, I kind of made like a little tin foil shade, trying to get like crafty in the barn with just like the materials that I had. But basically, enclosing the lights and facing them down like we should hopefully do with our artificial lights to just illuminate the nest and nothing else.
Nice. And then Ellen just asked, artificial nest, or, sorry, altricial nestlings are shielded from light by parents for warmth. How can they be affected by lights?
Yeah, that's a really good point. So I think that the chicks do experience a little bit of like filter through the lights, like you can see through feathers, you can kind of, the chicks aren't always like fully covered by the parent. And also the parent is probably also restless. So she might be like on and off of the eggs or the chicks throughout the night. And so they still experience a little bit of light pollution, probably not as intense as if it were direct, but they get a little bit.
Very interesting. Yeah, that's something that I think most people probably don't even think about when it comes to
Yeah.
nestlings. Very interesting. Well, thank you everybody for all those questions. We do still have time for more if you come up with any. So if you do have any, go ahead and enter those in the chat. And Murray, I wanted to also invite you to ask or to share anything you'd like about your work with Field Inclusive and maybe how some of that is going and maybe what people can do to help, marginalized people in the field as well.
Yeah, so the idea for Field Inclusive came about because of social safety issues that marginalized researchers face. And by social safety, we mean like encountering like angry or upset property owners, getting like unnecessary questioning from law enforcement, or like flat out like racist or like sexist encounters that could be either dangerous to the worker or like throw off their work or make them just like super uncomfortable doing field work. And but field work is still their job. And so we want to be able to provide some kind of like resources and like safety trainings so that all field biologists can still do their jobs. One of the solutions that we advocate for is having field safety gear, like a safety vest or like a car magnet that says like what organization or university you're in, or identification badges or something, just to help kind of prevent that like questioning and uncomfortable encounters. Field Inclusive also actually just recently raised like over $5,000 for our department at NC State to develop some NC State like field safety gear like that. So that's like super exciting. We also just closed a $500 research grant to like help support minority biologists buy field equipment or like afford like housing and transportation over the summer to their field site. And we have more grants coming up for like travel and like fellowships and everything. And so we've just been doing a lot, even though we just started in August, but we're rolling, and hopefully we hope to expand like more universities and more organizations and like just help them keep their students and employees safe.
Yeah, that's amazing. Super important work, especially if we want to keep the field diverse, right? We want to welcome everybody.
Exactly.
That's such a big part of it. So thanks for that important work. All right, and we did have a few more questions come in. So a question from Lois is, would artificial lighting cause birds to sing at night? Does that affect their reproductive success by wasting energy on unnecessary singing?
It definitely could, and I'm not sure what the research actually says about that. I do know that it says that birds stay up longer into the night singing, so they're getting less sleep. I don't know how that affects like their energy levels or like their feeding rates or anything, but they are definitely not getting enough rest. And I know I'm grumpy when I don't get enough rest. So imagine that the birds are tired.
Yeah, that would be an interesting area of future research for someone.
Mhm.
And then Jesse asked, if I see a bird with a bird band, what can I do?
Yeah, if you can like see it well enough so that you can get the number on the bird band, each band has a unique number on it. You can enter it into a USGS bird banding database, and it should tell you like all of the information about that bird, like where it's been, how old it is, like, and different stuff. So it's really cool if you get to see a bird with a band.
Yeah, and especially if you can find a way to read all the numbers on there so you can get all that information in, or they could be color bands too, and you can also enter those in the
Mhm.
USGS database. Sweet. All right. Well, thank you. I think that's the last question I see at the moment.
I'll put my contact information in the chat as well.
Yes, thank you. All right. And so while you're doing that, first of all, I do want to thank everybody who is attending tonight. I hope you enjoyed the talk. I know that I did. A really important topic that I know a lot of people engage with. Some people have studied it, like myself. Other people are involved with groups that do a lot of advocacy related to light pollution. So amazing. And echoing what Aura is saying here, congratulations on such incredible work.
Thank you so much.
Is there anything else that you would like to share with everybody, Murray?
Um, I think that covers everything. I just encourage everyone to try turning off the lights if they can, or like advocating for changing the types of lights that are being used in your area. And of course, going to check out the nonprofit Field Inclusive to support minority biologists like myself who are interested in field work but might not feel comfortable doing so.
Absolutely. And I will be sure to share those links with everybody in a follow-up email. So
Great.
once again, thank you so much, Marie. I thought this was really wonderful. I know it's getting a bit late out there on the East Coast, so we appreciate you staying up to do this.
Yes, thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's really been a pleasure. So again, thanks everybody for joining us, and I hope everybody has a great rest of your evening.